Shattering Myths is devoted to those who know that there is something dreadfully wrong with the political, religious, media, military, and economic institutions which govern and influence our world. We realize that they are the problem, and therefore they are not the solution. Our mission is to look behind the headlines as a result of this realization so that we know who is perpetrating the tragedies that are besieging our planet. Because based upon this plague of adverse political, religious, academic, and military, as well as media and economic influences, we have at most 15 years until all hell is unleashed. Now, in our second hour, we're going to engage God on His terms, through evidence and reason, since His guidance regarding His covenant provides the only reliable escape for ourselves and for our families. Our phone number, if you'd like to participate in this discussion, is toll-free, 877-300-7645. I recognize the big story of the day is the alleged agreement that has been reached between the United States and Iran relative to its nuclear ambitions, and we're going to go there. We'll probably spend 2 days on that agreement. But I want to begin at a far more troubling place with far more disconcerting news. Dateline is Beirut, Lebanon. 7 of Syria's most powerful rebel groups have joined ranks to create a new Islamic force that seeks to topple the government of President Bashar al-Assad and replace it with an Islamic state. The group that's not included in this is the Islamic State of Iraq. The Islamic State of Iraq is the group that initially provided the first jihadist to combat Assad. It is expressly excluded from this, and yet the group's stated intent is to establish an Islamic state in Iraq. That would mean that if we were to take the approach of saying, all right, yes, the al-Nusra Front and the Islamic State of Iraq, from which one conceived the other, is comprised of fundamentalists. And even though it is the largest group of jihadists, almost all of whom are foreigners, those who have traveled from Benghazi in particular, but throughout Libya and throughout the Islamic world, to fight jihad in Syria, the great jihad from their perspective. This is the last war that will unify Islam under a single caliphate so that Islam can embark upon its quest to control the entire world. So they view this as the battle to end all battles within Islam so that Islam can be united to control the entire world. Now, the West has said, okay, yeah, so al-Nusra, even though it's the largest group of armed militants, even though they're fundamentalist Muslims, and even though they're a terrorist group, along with the Islamic State of Iraq, from which it was born, but the rest of the rebels, they are moderates. Well, the rest of the rebels announced that they are now the Islamic Front, and that their goal is to establish an Islamic state in Syria. The new group, the Islamic Front, was announced in a video shown on Al Jazeera television on Friday and featured some of Syria's most widely recognized rebel commanders. While some rebels and opposition activists hailed the new group as a major step forward for the anti-Assad insurgency, it remained unclear to what extent the announcement reflected a true reorganization of rebel forces or what difference it would make on the ground. Make this clear, because the journalist doesn't seem to get it. All that happened is that the Islamic militants waging war against Assad have said that they are resolutely and fundamentally Islamic, that their ambition is to establish an Islamic state in Syria, period. And these were the so-called moderates. Most of the participating groups, while maintaining their own command structures, have long cooperated in battle And throughout 2.5 years of war in Syria, new rebel formations have been announced frequently, many of them faring no better against government forces than those they preceded. Some rebels said that the unification was also meant as a show of force by mainline rebel factions. Mainline, so they're inferring here moderate. But they can't say moderate because, guess you'll read here in a moment, or I'll read for you, what their announcement was. But that these mainline rebel factions, according to this journalist, are opposed to Syria's al-Qaeda affiliates, the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, or ISIS, as it has been called. Well, they don't say that they're opposed to ISIS at all. In fact, their goals and the goals of ISIS, the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq, are identical. Now, ISIS, according to this journalist, and it's true, has welcomed thousands of foreign jihadists. The best estimate is around 20 to 40,000 foreign mujahideen that have come into Syria as a religious campaign to engage in the great jihad, looking forward to dying as martyrs. The statement announcing the Islamic Front described it as follows. This is their statement. Read it and weep, John McClown. An independent political, military, and social formation that seeks to completely topple the Assad regime in Syria and build an orthodox Islamic State in which Allah is the only sovereign. End quote. If there was any doubt that what I have been saying now for over 2 years, that the rebels in Syria are fundamentalist Muslims who have a single motivation, which is to establish a Sunni Islamic state, a theocracy, based upon Islamic law, based upon Sharia, where Allah alone reigns, it has been dissipated. It was obvious to anyone who was aware of what these individuals were doing and saying, from whence they came. But now they have clarified it for us. There are no moderates. There are no freedom fighters. There aren't no secular warriors. This is a war being fought by now two groups. The Islamic Front, which seeks to establish an orthodox, which means fundamentalist, Islamic state in which Allah alone is sovereign, governed by Sharia law, and the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, which has exactly the same stated goals. Therefore, if the Assad regime, as horrible as it has been and continues to be, is toppled, the results will be infinitely worse for the people of Syria and for the world. This news out of CNN. More than 11,000 children have been killed, most of them tortured, during the 3-year civil war in Syria, including young boys and girls who were tortured and then executed, according to a report from a London-based think tank. The Oxford Research Group said that most of the 11,420 children that have been confirmed dead were killed in explosions, and many others were shot to death. Teenage boys were most likely to be the victims of targeted killings, according to the report entitled Stolen Futures, The Hidden Toll of Child Casualties in Syria. By the way, the fact that this is a think tank in London ought to make your skin crawl. The reason that the Middle East is as it is because of the way Britain dealt with the fiefdoms that it conceived after toppling the Ottoman Empire, particularly as it listened to Syria and the warlords in Saudi Arabia as well as to the Persians in Iran, and created an Islamic entity set to devour Israel. And the fact that they fought on behalf of the Muslims in Israel's War of Independence. The blame beyond Islam for the conditions that exist in Syria and throughout the Middle East and the savage imposition of Islam is to be blamed largely on Great Britain. This article goes on to say, this study goes on to say, quote, what is most disturbing about the findings of this report is not only the sheer numbers of children murdered in this conflict, but the way they were murdered. More than 1,000 children were summarily executed. 764 were killed by snipers. 389 children, even infants, were tortured before being killed. Can you imagine a religion, the Islamic Front, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, the Shiite Mujahideens fighting on behalf of the Assad regime, equally culpable, targeting children, infants, as snipers, torturing children to death? Today, my friends, there is only one doctrine in all of the world that is capable of imposing this caliber of savagery. It is Islam. It is why the two opposing parties in the Syrian civil war, those savaging the government, are both called Islamic. The children's death, this article and research says, are increasing, not decreasing. Both Syrian troops and rebel groups have been blamed not only for targeting civilians, but for killing and torturing children. There's nothing good here. The British report that we've been addressing relative to the torture and murder of infants in the Syrian war goes on to say, and I quote, there are well-documented cases of individual children being tortured and executed and entire families, including babies, being massacred. The UN High Commission for Human Rights has said the overall death toll now has topped 100,000. We really don't know the number. The UN says that more than 2.1 million people have fled Syria as refugees, about 10% of the overall population. It is a hell zone. And I want to make this point emphatically clear. While Great Britain has their ugly fingerprints all over the mess that exists today in the Islamic world, the primary reason that the Civil War was begun is because the United States stupidly invaded Iraq and gave Iraq to Iran. And we need to keep that in mind, because today we have witnessed a hugfest and a great celebration between the Obama administration and the Iranians, who are pursuing a nuclear bomb. We, the United States, invaded Iraq and turned Iraq's enemy into Iran, turned Iran's enemy into Iran West, giving Iran the country, fundamentally changing the scope of the influence of Shia Islam as it exists in Iran and now in Iraq throughout the region. And so Sunni forces, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, and others, have decided that they should use Syria as a proxy war to try to thwart the ambitions of the Iranians. But keep in mind, this war that has left so many children murdered and tortured is a direct result of the stupidity of the United States invading Iraq. Now, before I turn to the next item in the news, which is in Libya, and then to the American-Iranian agreement, Glenn has called in from Philadelphia, and I'd like to hear what Glenn has to say about the overall meddling of the world in the Middle East and what we have done to make such a horrid monster. Hi, Glenn.
Good morning, Anna. Yeah, undoubtedly it was, quite stupid. I agree with you about the U.S., invading Iraq and Afghanistan, all that sort of thing. But it seems to me the U.S. has been used as little more than a mercenary entity by the globalists through much of the 20th century and now the 21st. But the Brits, I'm sure you're aware, Napoleon, paragon of virtue that he was, referred to the United Kingdom as perfide Albion, perfidious England. And, if you look at their involvement all through the late 19th and early 20th centuries, it was, they were involved with the establishment of the House of Saud. They were involved with the Balfour Declaration, the establishment of Israel. A young military officer named Winston Churchill drew the modern borders of Iraq while he was in the military. So they sort of, they've sort of laid out and drawn the risk game board, the game of world domination. They've drawn the game board, actually.
Correct.
And now they move the pieces about on it, and then now they'll have one of their think tanks capitalize on this travesty, which is lamentable and horrible and deserves to be decried. But even in so doing, they're utilizing the emotional capital from that to further direct things, as things move on.
Yeah, it is truly amazing how the United States has, to a large degree, and I would agree with this, Glenn, has to a large degree been the implement of what was once Great Britain. Britain was the most evil and manipulative nation on earth, and it was for really all of its imperial time. And it's interesting that the colony that rejected the king has come now to be the implement of the Lesser Britain today. And while the risk board, as you call it, was laid out and the lines drawn by Great Britain following World War I, and only able to do so because in this case, Winston Churchill and Woodrow Wilson conspired together to get the Lusitania sunk so that they could justify America coming into that war on behalf of America's and British banking interests. Ever since that time, we have been the ploy of Great Britain, and collectively we have done great harm to the world. We'll return to Shattering Myths after the commercial break. Returning to the next story in the news, it's another example of what happens when the United States and Great Britain do joint ventures collectively. The Great Britain gave lots of verbal support to the United States bombing of Libya. And the purpose of that, of course, was to usher out Muammar Gaddafi, who the British did not like in terms of the oil deals that he was offering them, and instead to usher in an assortment of jihadists, the very jihadists, by the way, that are now unifying under the Islamic Front to impose a orthodox religious state in Syria. So we read today that as a result of the United States and Great Britain working together to establish a terrorist Libya. The clashes now between Libyan troops and militants in the eastern city of Benghazi on Monday killed at least 9 people. This is after gunfire and anti-aircraft weaponry being shot at masses of people on the ground. Killed some 50 to 60 the previous week. Is now a test between militant groups. Still in training, Libya's new military, which is nothing but a group of unified Islamists, are now fighting Islamists, and you have militants and militias at war with one another. Gunfire and explosions could be heard throughout Benghazi as the cities was ablaze. Fighting broke out when an Army Special Forces unit pursued a suspect into an area where the Islamic militant group Ansar al-Sharia operates its own checkpoints. Ansar al-Sharia, of course, is the militant group that claimed credit for killing 4 Americans in the U.S. consulate in Benghazi a year ago, when the U.S. president said, oh, no, they weren't killed by an Islamic terrorist organization. No, they were killed by a random upswelling of people who were protesting a Christian film. Well, I don't suppose that Ansar al-Sharia hosts theaters to air the film Innocence of Muslims, but look at the mess that we have created. And in Washington, no one taking responsibility, no one saying, boy, did we really blow it. Look what we did to that country. We turned what was a secular dictatorship into an Islamic war zone. We did that. We provided the weapons. We provided the bombs. We made this mess. But no. Well, we're making a much bigger mess now, much worse than surface-to-air missiles, much worse than rocket-propelled grenades, much worse than anti-aircraft guns being leveled at civilians. Have you seen the pictures of American and Iranians hugging? It's as if they were of the same mind. This from CNN. Tehran, Iran. Just a day after Iran agreed to limit its nuclear program in exchange for lighter economic sanctions, the difference in the moods on the streets of Tehran and Jerusalem could not be starker. I'm so very happy about this agreement, an Iranian official told CNN in Tehran. We hope that all the world knows that we use this nuclear power was supplied, this nuclear, for just peace, not for war. Well, the view of Islam is that since peace is listed twice in the Quran, is there will be peace when everyone submits to Allah and Islam. Now, of course, they're lying. You look at a nation like Syria, where everyone except the small Christian population has surrendered to Allah and Islam, and yet they are killing each other in savagery. The realization is that the Iranian nuclear program was conceived for a singular purpose, and that is to make certain that Iran could not be thwarted in its desire to not only expand its influence, but to destroy Israel. That is the entire purpose of that program. We know that for certain because a country that floats on oil and gas would never, ever, under any circumstances, develop a nuclear industry to generate electricity. All a nuclear plant does is boil water. And the Iranians are burning off natural gas that it considers a menace amongst its wells of petroleum, all of which could be diverted to run steam turbines and generate more electricity than the country could possibly use at a tiny fraction of the cost. The fact that it pursues uranium enrichment, therefore, and the development of military technology for the carrying of a nuclear bomb is singular. There's nothing even plausibly peaceful about it. And when Iran decided that it would take its nuclear enrichment underground in Fordow to bury it beneath the capability of bunker-busting bombs, beneath the capability of Israel to thwart, it was announcing to the world that we are making a bomb. And when Iran decided that it was not going to enrich uranium to 4% fissile purity, but to 20%, recognizing that within a matter of weeks you can take 20% fissile purity to the level necessary to create a fission bomb, and that anything above 4% is useless in the generation of electricity. When that occurred, there was no longer any justifiable excuse. There was no longer any credibility in the Iranian claim that it had peaceful intentions relative to its nuclear program. Here is a country essentially risking bankruptcy of its nation, the confiscation of its resources and wealth around the world, to generate electricity by stupidly building centrifuges to refine uranium to 5 times the fissile purity necessary to run a nuclear plant when it burns off copious amounts of natural gas. It was unbelievably stupid for anyone to buy into the Iranian claim, and now the United States is giving them a free pass on everything that they have done. That is the reason the Iranians are celebrating. In Jerusalem, that is not the case. Benjamin Netanyahu means Yahowah's gift, slammed the deal as a historic mistake. He was trying to emphasize that this historic mistake was on the scale of Neville Chamberlain's Peace in Our Time. That when Neville Chamberlain gave the high ground of Czechoslovakia and its weapons manufacturing capability to the Nazis to achieve peace, when it in fact ignited world war. That is what Benjamin Netanyahu is saying here. Listen, we know for certain that by the fall of 2026, we will enter the tribulation. We know that in 2027, we're going to endure an unified Islamic war against Israel. It is 2013 now, almost 2014. That means that this is only 13 to 14 years away. That war, over the course of 3 years, goes nuclear. Yahowah, specifically through his prophets, tells us that the elements themselves melt with intense heat. He tells us that first 1/4 of the world's population and then 1/3 of those who remain, meaning half of the world's population, die as a result of this war. He tells us that 1/3 of the Earth's surface becomes uninhabitable as a result of this war. And therefore, for that all to happen, as he said, someone had to do something incredibly stupid, which is to enable and abet someone really stupid's nuclear ambitions, someone who will start it. The United States has done this with Iran. I agree with Benjamin Netanyahu. This deal was a historic mistake. The deal is only for 6 months, and the deal really isn't a deal. The deal only says that for 6 months, the United States will essentially allow Iran to operate business as usual, get billions of dollars that had been held in foreign banks, be able to sell petrochemicals on the world market, that sanctions against Iran would be released, and that Iran pledges that for 6 months it will not roll back any of its nuclear gains, but will only stop advancing them for a period of 6 months while it capitalizes on the receipt of all of these funds. We will, in future programs, there won't be enough time today, but I'm going to go through the entire agreement. It's 4 pages. It is worth our consideration because it is the match that will light the bomb that will become World War III. The lives of 3.5 billion people have just been sacrificed as a result of the stupidity of Barack Hussein Obama and his cronies. And make no mistake, during the past few months, when news of an impending deal with Iran emerged, Israel came out and said, this is no deal. This is unbelievably suicidal, and asked the United States to step away from a deal that was being reported to having been negotiated by France and other countries. But the truth is, this deal has been under negotiation for almost 2 years, intently for the last year, and that the instigator of the deal is the Obama administration. And it has conducted this deal secretly during this time, the whole time being responsible for it. Now, when we return to Shattering Myths, we'll begin to talk about this deal, how it is being sold, how it is being presented, and then on future programs get into the specific details as they exist on the 4-page memorandum. Welcome back to Shattering Myths. We're discussing the deal that is being touted as this great achievement by the Obama administration that I protest is nothing but lighting the match on the bomb that will be World War III. As part of this agreement, which, by the way, is only a 6-month accord, the entire accord is documented on 4 pages, and its duration is only for 6 months. Most of what it talks about is a comprehensive deal, but the comprehensive deal has not even been negotiated, much less agreed upon. The 6-month deal would have world leaders say that it is a path to pave the way to a long-term guarantee that Iran won't produce a nuclear weapon. It doesn't have any provision that would prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. In fact, there's no constraints on Iran once the 6-month trial period here is over. World powers will suspend sanctions on various items, including gold and petrochemicals. That means that Iran is free to buy and sell gold. It is buying gold because it doesn't want U.S. or euros as currency. And it is now able to sell its exports of petrochemicals without any restraint. While the U.S. says that will provide Iran with $1.5 billion in revenue, that's they forgot to give you the period of time. It's about $1.5 billion a day in revenue. And in addition to that, the White House lied in suggesting that this benefit to Iran is $1.5 billion when they know that they've already sweetened the pot to instantly release $4.3 billion worth of Iranian currency that is held in Western banks that was based upon the previous sale of Iranian oil being released to them, $4.3 billion instantly. So the White House is deliberately lying. Not every country is buying into this. Canadian Foreign Minister John Baird, for example, said his country will maintain all of its sanctions on Iran. Quote, "The people of Iran deserve freedom and prosperity that has been denied by the regime's nuclear ambition. Until then, Canadian sanctions will remain in full force." End quote. In a televised speech, the Iranian President Hassan Rouhani, who, by the way, for years was the person who was most responsible for running cover for Iran's nuclear ambition, while they did everything necessary to develop a bomb, said that this was a win for the negotiators. His negotiators, mind you. We are pleased after 10 years that an agreement on this level has been reached. This is a 6-month agreement that essentially does nothing but releases Iranian assets and frees Iran to begin selling its oil again. He played up the fact that the deal allows Iran to enrich uranium to a level making it usable for nuclear fuel. Yeah, Iran can continue to enrich uranium to 5% fissile purity, much as it wants, even though it already has more nuclear fuel to run its one and only not yet completed nuclear plant for an indefinite period of time, for essentially forever. During the 6 months of the agreement, he said, major facilities in Iran will continue. Yep. He's saying that we can continue to enrich uranium. We will be able to continue the development of the major sites in Iran. That was his statement. He says that the level of 5% enrichment is well below the level needed to make weapons. Yeah, that's true. But they already have an enormous stockpile of 20% enriched uranium, and they have a plant capable of taking that uranium and turning it into plutonium to make a bomb. The United States President Barack Hussein Obama said that the agreement includes, quote, substantial limitations that will help prevent Iran from creating a nuclear weapon. No, it doesn't. Some Republican opponents in Washington agreed with the Israeli officials, saying that the plan will actually help in Iran's quest for a bomb, and they would be right. Quote, this agreement shows other rogue states that wish to go nuclear that all you have to do is obfuscate, cheat, and lie for a decade, and eventually the United States will tire and drop all demands. This was a quote from Senator Marco Rubio of Florida.